Welcome to the Pushing Beauty podcast. This is Michelle Diavella, and these are words from my soul. I've been getting some questions, requests for topics of things to write about and to speak about, and sometimes it can be interesting to feel into what wants to be written about and what wants to be spoken about. And this one in particular felt more like something I wanted to talk about. I get this question quite a bit, and I'm going to actually read the one that came in most recently. This is from Katya, who's actually a former client of mine and a reader and listener. She says that she dreams of me writing an article on my discipline, or she says she would imagine the word discipline would end up actually being my practice. So she says, essentially, how do you keep your work going with rigid structure and competent frequency? Or is it the other way around? It guides you. In any case, I think there's some sort of discipline. Okay. So essentially the question is, how do I do the work that I do? You know, do I have some kind of discipline and practice and some kind of structure? And I have quite a bit to say about this. The first is that I happen to be somebody who is very self-motivated, very efficient, and very focused. And I guess I'm lucky that I'm that way. I don't think that everybody is built this way. I feel that I am somewhat wired to be very self-motivated. I've had people tell me over the years that they don't know how, I've run my own business. They could never do it. They need somewhere to go and other people to hold them accountable and this and that. And I do think that naturally there are some people who lean more towards doing really well as a 9-to-5 or being held accountable, and some people who are really good at being self-motivated. And I happen to be somebody who's very self-motivated. I've always pretty much been that way. I've gone through a lot of different practices and structures for my life and my business. At this point in my life, I don't really have any type of rigid practice or structure because I don't think it really serves me very well. So there are certain things, for example, I do breath work pretty much every day. I try to do yoga most days. I try to write most days. I work on my business pretty much every day. I do a variety of things, but they're not really what I would necessarily consider a practice. Of course, I do have a breathwork practice and I have a yoga practice, and I would sort of talk about it in that way. But for me personally, it's not hard for me to do the things that nourish my soul. Mostly because I like to do things that I like to do, but also because I've done so much work and moved through so much resistance. I actually had a conversation with my brother about this yesterday after this question was asked to me. And I noticed he's also somebody, my brother, I have several brothers, my brother, Matt Diavella, who some of you may know, he has a podcast, and I'll link his information in the show notes as well. He's somebody who is extremely motivated and creates a ridiculous amount of content, and creating high quality content. And so we were talking about this, and one of the things that I had realized during our conversation was that he and I have both, moved through a lot of the resistance that some of you might be working through in order to get the content to come out a little bit quicker. Some people, I think, experience resistance always, will always feel nervous when they're about to go on stage, will always feel like they have to move through some really heavy energy to write the book or whatever. And I think that I'm sure there's going to be other things that I work on. The next book that I work on or whatever, it's going to have its own set of energy that's going to be difficult to move through. But for the most part, the things that I create, all of the writings on my blog, this podcast, the workshops that I create, and anything that I'm doing in my life, I don't have a ton of resistance around it anymore. And I know for him as well, there's not really any of that self-consciousness or why am I doing what I'm doing? Or is this actually working? And like getting really caught up in like the outcome. I think this is like the perk of like once you know who you are and you know what you're doing and you feel good about the work that you're doing, you just kind of get to work and get it done and get it going. But there are some things, that I think that can be really helpful. So for example, I do notice for myself that I'm very motivated in the mornings. And I've gone through periods of time where I've been like, oh, it's not good first thing in the morning to like dive right into work. I would take like 2 hours and I would do breath work first thing in the morning and I would do yoga and I would make a really nourishing breakfast and read some of my book, whatever book I'd be reading in the morning. And I would take like 2 hours. And I did that for a big period of time. And then I realized that first thing in the morning, I'm actually really motivated to get work done. And I can get a lot of stuff done if I dive into work first thing in the morning. And then I'll have, energy to do all of the other things that I want to do later in the day. So I will often do that. Not always, but pretty frequently I'm going to be waking up in the morning, making some breakfast, sitting down and like starting to work right away. This doesn't work for everybody, particularly because some people have a really hard time like sitting down to do meditation or do breath work or whatever type of meditation or spiritual practice later in the day or in the evenings because they feel too tired. So if that's the case, like I will recommend to clients always to first thing in the morning, do like your spiritual practice so that it doesn't get to be the thing that's like pushed to the wayside. For me, like I don't have any issues with that. Like I'll do breath work any time of day. It doesn't really matter for me. So I can do that work in the morning and then go ahead and do like my breath work session later and yoga later in the day. For a while, I was using a planner and every morning I would write down like the 3 most important things that I wanted to get done that day. And I did that for a couple of years until very recently as well. And one of the things that's changed for me is that I rediscovered human design. And I'm going to be doing some writing about this, which actually by the time this podcast gets launched, I will probably already have an article live. So you can go over to the show notes and I will be linking to that. But essentially human design is a system of understanding who you are particularly in this world. So it's based off of exactly the moment in time and space that you were born was essentially imprinted with a set of energies that some are defined, which can help you understand what type of person you are and what kind of energy you have and how to best use your energy in the world. And there are some open channels where those things are not fixed, but there are some things that are fixed. And that's what I found to be really, really fascinating in understanding, like, these are the things about me that are just kind of the way that I am. And they aren't the place that I need to focus my energy in changing. And there's other areas that are pretty clear, like where the wounds are. And those have been very in sync in terms of like what I've discovered about myself. But just in a very general sense, there's 5 types of people. And I am somebody who would be called a manifesting generator. And I will also link to the place where you can put in your birthday and the time you were born to find out what type you are. And that will give you some really basic information to see what type you are. And that will actually help you understand your energy type. And so I'm a manifesting generator, which means that I am somebody who has a shit ton of energy and I can do a lot. And I need to actually be doing a lot of different things. And so that very much resonated with me because I am somebody who I'm like not just a breathwork teacher. I also have a podcast and I write and I wrote a book and I create workshops. I'm like an idea person, but I also have a lot of energy to implement things. And so that really rings true for me. And so what's interesting is like we live in a culture where people really emphasize becoming an expert in one particular thing. And that has never really resonated with me, though, breath work and healing has been the thing that I have the most passion and experience in. There are a lot of other things that I am really good at and that I really like to spend my time and energy doing and incorporating. And so instead of telling myself, this isn't good, you should really be focusing on just this and this alone, I actually can now embrace, I actually love to do all of these other things, and all of these other things make up who I am, and they really help support me in, the reason that I'm here. So one of the things that's changed, and one of the reasons why I'm not super focused on doing the things on my to-do list anymore, is because part of my design is that I need to do things that light me up, that make me feel really, really good. And so I've always been pretty in tune with that. That's one of the reasons why I was saying earlier that I can just kind of do the things that I like to do because I like to do them. And so even breath work, I really love to do breath work. I will love to lay down and get my energy moving and sob and clear some stuff out. And even if it's emotionally painful, to me, I enjoy the process of learning more about myself and clearing out more of the things that aren't serving me. Now I'll have a list of things that I feel excited to do. What are the things that I really want to work on? And so I'll just feel into what is the thing, I'll maybe look at that list and see what feels most exciting to me right now in this particular moment. So in the past, I maybe would have just been whatever's on the to-do list, the first thing, I'm just going to do it and check it off, and then move to the next thing and check it off, and move to the next thing and check it off. And I can do that. I have the energy to do that, and I have the discipline to do that, but it doesn't feel as good. So now I'm basically asking myself, which thing on the list do you want to work on right now? And one of the cool things that I've noticed is that maybe right this moment, I don't feel like doing, one of the things on my list today is to paint the house. And so maybe I don't really feel like painting the house right now. Maybe I feel like recording this podcast, which is what I'm doing. And so that felt like a big yes. And so I decided to do that. But 6 hours from now, hopefully when the sun is going down, it's not that hot outside, I'll get a yes to paint the house. And then I'll have more energy to put towards that, rather than having to move through the resistance of doing something that isn't really what my soul wants to do right now. There's a lot of tips and tricks that I could give you around these things. The thing is that I don't really use a lot of them anymore. Again, I've done them at different periods of time. So for example, having strict discipline around, if you're going to write, just write, turn off your Wi-Fi, put your phone on airplane mode, don't go on Instagram, don't go on social media, things like that. I've done those things before. I've done batching. So you could also look into batching, which is essentially where you structure your days. You can do it different ways. I used to do 3 hours at a time, because if you're working on anything creative, it usually takes a couple of hours to get into the flow state. But I've also done things where it's an hour at a time where I'll batch. So it's an hour, turning off everything, only focusing on whatever project that I'm focusing on for that period of time. And then I'll set a timer, and the timer will go off, and then I'll go take a break. So I'll go outside and take a walk, or I'll do some yoga, or I'll do something else. And I would structure my days like that. I'm not really doing that stuff anymore, just because I'm really in a flow and connected to, I'm not going to just be sitting around on my ass doing nothing. I'm constantly asking myself, okay, what's up next? What do I want to be doing? And sometimes the answer is that I'm going to be writing something for a couple of hours. Sometimes the answer is that I'm going to go outside. Sometimes the answer is that I'm going to read a book. I'm going to make some food. I'm going to call somebody. So for me, my life is very holistic. I don't work a 9-to-5 job or work a certain number of hours in a day and then I'm done. There's always more work to do. And I'm pretty good, gratefully, at having a really healthy work-life balance. My work, most of it does not feel like work. So, and I really love to relax and enjoy myself and, do all the kinds of leisurely things that really nourish me, like reading books and watching documentaries and really great shows and chatting with my loved ones, being outside in nature, taking trips, doing all the things. I do also go through periods of time of getting really organized. So for example, right now I am focusing on the podcast. I had not put out a podcast episode in quite a while. I think it was a couple of months. And I had 4 episodes that I had recorded, but there's a whole process, obviously, that goes on behind the scenes of like getting something done. It's not just recording it. So it's recording it, then editing it, converting the files, then making graphics for it, uploading it to YouTube, uploading it to Libsyn, which is the company that sends basically the podcast out onto iTunes. And then it's like making the promotional graphics and uploading it to my website, uploading all of the content onto the website and the show notes, and then promoting, the Instagram images and all that stuff, creating all of that. So I create everything. I do it all by myself. So I like the process, but it can be challenging sometimes. I think this is one of the things that I would suggest if you notice this for yourself. It can be really challenging for me to get into the flow of working on the podcast or like creating articles or something when I haven't been doing it for a while. Some of it is like I use Final Cut Pro and I taught myself the program years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And so I don't use it that often, but when I do use it, it'll feel a little bit clunky getting back into it because I don't use it that often. So I like to start to like batch things in that way, where right now I'm like editing a bunch of podcast episodes and then I'm using it now. So it's like much faster for me to get into the flow. And so the past 2 days I've been doing all of the things that I just mentioned before in Final Cut on my website, on Instagram, in the back end, and getting everything ready to go so that each week all I really need to do is like upload the video to YouTube and then make the website live. So that's something that can be really helpful if you're somebody who either if you're focused on one particular thing or if you have a lot of different things that you like to do like me, focus on one thing, maybe 1 week or different periods at a time. So one of the things that's happened when I created Pushing Beauty was that I knew that there was something from my soul that was coming through that needed to come through. And that's essentially what the business is. Pushing Beauty was me naming my soul and beginning to have a place, creating a home for my soul to express itself. And so it's always a manifestation of that. And so for me, it's always feeling into, am I aligned with my soul? Am I aligned with what it is I'm here to be doing? Because it can be very easy to get caught up in all of the things like getting 10,000 followers on Instagram and then doing that by creating a feed that you think is what other people are going to like, and really getting caught up in some end goal that isn't really about what I'm here to be doing anyway. And so I'm constantly checking myself on that and coming back into like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Is this serving me? Does this feel right to me? And that for me is really about having a deep connection and relationship to my soul and my intuition. And the way that I do that is through my breathwork practice. That's what I would suggest for anybody who's trying to kind of quote unquote figure it out. For a very long time, I suffered because I was trying to figure out with my mind what my soul was here to do. And you can't figure that out from the mind. So my process, the way that I run my business and the way that I create is very creative. It's not rigid and structured. And I find that I am somebody who can thrive with structure, but I don't think that I need it as much because of all of the work that I've done on myself. So I think it's a little bit of a byproduct of the healing work that I've done, but also because I am somebody who's very focused. I don't need to turn off a lot of things. Like I was talking earlier about turning Wi-Fi off and like batching and things like that. Sometimes I get into these modes where like I'm just flowing, but I don't like, sometimes I'm looking at Instagram in between things or reading a book, or my mind does move pretty quickly. And so sometimes I'll get a little bit bored with something uploading or something like that. So I can get a lot of things done at once. But this is just the process that I use now. It's like, just for me, it's really about like accepting who I am, knowing the way that I work best, and then paying close attention to like the things that aren't working and the things that are holding me back and the things that don't feel very good when I'm doing them. And there's always going to be things that we do that like we don't love to do. I just try to look at it as like, do I need to be doing this? And if I do, then okay, cool, I'm going to keep doing it. And if I don't really need to be doing it, maybe it's something that I am evolving out of. So I hope that answered your question, Katya. I know it's probably not what everybody wants to hear. We have a tendency, I think, to say like, do X, Y, and Z, and then you will find success or find happiness or find self-love or whatever it is. But I think the point that I'm making here is that the creative process is messy, and getting to know yourself is something that actually I think will really inform the way that you are meant to work and the way that's best for you. I think human design, I'm just dabbling into it now. Actually became pretty obsessed and have been reading like a ton of stuff about it. It really resonates with me. And that could be something that might help you have like a sort of structure or like understanding of, okay, this is like my energy type and this is the best way for me to use my energy. But I also think if you pay attention to what works best for you, instead of like listening to what somebody else says is like the way, or what somebody else says is the best way for them. You can hear some things that I'm saying and some things that other people say and say, oh, I want to try those things on, but then really pay attention. Like, do you thrive in that kind of an environment? And for some people, like they need to be holed up in like a cabin to like write a book. And I did that too. To finish writing my book, I got a cabin and spent 5 days there and finished writing my book that way. I think there are some tools that really work very well. And that's one of the reasons actually that I bought the cabin that I own, Fox and Feather, to have it be a space where people can focus and be creative and detox from the city and technology and connect to the land and their intuition. And there is definitely a lot of truth to the fact that you can't hear your own soul, you can't hear your own intuition if you don't shut off some of the external chatter or all of the external chatter for periods of time. So I'll also link in the show notes to my Getting Started with Breathwork guide, which will be really helpful if you're looking for a type of meditation or something to help give you access to your intuition. Okay, thanks for being with me, and hope to have you with me next time.